It's funny how life can change in an instant, right? One moment, you're at the top of the world. The next, you're at the center of a storm you never saw coming. Howard Cosell, a name so tied to sports, so wrapped in controversy and charisma, once had everything. He was invincible. But then, one September night, it all came crashing down. One sentence during a football game, one offhand comment, and his entire career, his entire legacy, was forever altered. What did he say? Well, that's where the story gets interesting. Let's rewind to where it all began. Howard William Cohen, born in 1918 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. His family, Jewish immigrants who fled Eastern Europe, believed in one thing above all: education. It was their ticket to a better life, and it was clear early on that Howard was destined to make his own mark. Brooklyn, New York, is where he would build his foundation. In a crowded, noisy neighborhood full of people searching for the American dream, Howard found his weapon: words. He wasn't a fighter in the usual sense. He fought with his mind, with his quick wit, with a sharp tongue that never backed down. His ego grew with him, but there was a reason for it. As a young man, he understood the power of identity. So, in the late 1930s, while at NYU, he made a decision that would change everything. He changed his last name from Cohen to Cosell. It wasn't just about his family's roots or honoring his grandfather. It was about standing out. It was about refusing to be overlooked, refusing to blend in. He wanted to be remembered, not just noticed, and remember him they did. As a teenager, Howard was already taking risks. As sports editor of his high school paper, he didn't shy away from speaking truth to power. He wasn't writing fluff. He was bold, challenging, unafraid of what people thought. At just 16, he was practicing the kind of journalism that would later define his career. But it wasn't about just having a career. It was about impact, about making a difference. After law school, Cosell could have followed a safe, successful path. He had a law degree, a steady income, the kind of life most would dream of, but it didn't satisfy him. He didn't just want to practice law. He wanted something louder, something more visible, something that would make people feel. And that's when radio came calling. In 1953, a break came when Howard got the chance to host a small show on ABC radio. It didn't pay, not at first, but Howard didn't care. He saw the bigger picture. That show, though lighthearted, gave him a taste of the power of unscripted conversation. He saw how a single offhand comment could spark a fire. He saw the power of truth in its rawest form, and he wasn't about to play it safe. Soon Cosell wasn't just a host. He was reshaping how sports were told. He didn't care for the usual play-by-play commentary. He wasn't there to flatter athletes or cheer for the home team. He called it like he saw it. And that didn't sit well with everyone. Some hated him, some loved him, but no one could ignore him. What really set Howard apart was his relationship with Muhammad Ali. Ali at that time was facing the kind of backlash that only those with the courage to stand for something bigger than themselves could ever understand. When Ali changed his name to Muhammad Ali, the world pushed back. But Howard stood by him. He was the first to call him by his name, regardless of the hate mail pouring in. Howard knew what it meant to be an outsider. He understood prejudice because he had lived it. His decision to stand by Ali wasn't just about boxing. It was about standing up for who someone truly was, no matter the cost. And that bond, that respect, would define their relationship for years to come. Ali wasn't just a boxer to Howard. He was a symbol of courage, of standing up for what's right, no matter the consequences. They weren't just broadcaster and athlete. They were kindred spirits, fighting against a world that wasn't ready. For their truths, the magic they created on screen was undeniable. Their interviews, their banter, their deep respect for each other's journey, every moment was electric. But it wasn't just entertainment, it was a conversation. Real, raw, and unforgettable. And even when Ali was banned from boxing, when the world had turned its back on him, Howard didn't forget. He kept inviting Ali on his show, kept giving him a voice when no one else would. But let's not forget about the defining moments that made Howard's career legendary. The Monday Night Football days. This wasn't just sports commentary. This was a new era. Howard brought drama, conflict, and real conversation to the broadcast booth. It wasn't just about the game. It was about what was happening around the game, about the personalities, the tensions, the sparks flying between him and his co-hosts. The audience didn't tune in just for the football. They tuned in for the show. And then, the moment that no one will ever forget, down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier. Those words, those three simple words, captured the moment in a way no one else could. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about the emotion, the disbelief, the sheer intensity of the moment. Howard didn't just describe sports. He made us feel them. Howard Cosell didn't just tell us about sports. He showed us the human side of the game, the struggles, the triumphs, the pain, and the joy. His voice, sharp and unforgettable, became the soundtrack of a generation's sports memories. But more than that, Howard became a voice for those who had none. He gave people a platform, a stage, and a chance to speak their truth. And in doing so, he changed broadcasting forever. So, when you think of Howard Cosell, think not just of the man who shaped sports commentary, but of the man who stood for something bigger. Think of the man who believed that truth, courage, and respect were more important than the game itself. Because, in the end, it wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about telling the story in the most honest, powerful way possible. And that's a legacy that will never fade. Howard Cosell, a man whose voice defined generations of sports fans, once said something that changed everything in the blink of an eye. That moment, during a Monday Night Football game, would mark the end of his legendary career. But before that, his life had been filled with a constant barrage of critics, battles, and controversies that made him a lightning rod for both admiration and hatred. The chaos was as much a part of his legacy as his unmistakable voice. Cosell wasn't a man everyone loved. In fact, some hated him with a passion. There was the famous feud with sports columnist Dick Young, who called him Howie, the fraud. Young did more than mock him in print. He tried to sabotage Cosell's interviews, shouting obscenities while the cameras rolled. It wasn't just personal. It was a battle between two different worlds. Cosell, the brash new face of television, was clashing with the old guard of journalism, represented by Young. The fight wasn't just over personal insults. It was about the future of sports media itself. But Howard wasn't the type to back down. He fired back, calling Young a right-wing cultural illiterate. And their war of words became as infamous as Cosell's most memorable calls. Their feud played out in columns, on air, and even in locker rooms. It wasn't about ego. It was a fight for the soul of sports commentary, one that would eventually redefine the way the world saw sports media. And if you thought Cosell had it easy with his fellow broadcasters, think again. Take his relationship with Chris Konomaki, a respected figure in motorsports. Konomaki once called Cosell's ego the biggest he'd ever seen. When Cosell held a grudge, he held it tight. Even a small mistake on Konomaki's part would set him off, and Cosell made sure the world knew about it, again and again. To work with him wasn't always easy, but one thing was certain: you couldn't ignore him. His energy, his brilliance, and yes, his conflict became part of his mystique. But let's not forget the moments that made Howard a target. Sports writer Jimmy Cannon famously took aim at Cosell, mocking his toupee, his name change, even his very identity. Cannon didn't just attack his public persona. He questioned the man behind the microphone. He called him fake, a man more about performance than substance. Cosell became a caricature in the eyes of many, a target for parody. But instead of breaking him, it only fueled his fame. Cosell's most famous critics and enemies often helped make him unforgettable. He didn't apologize. He didn't hide. In fact, he often took a stance that put him at odds with others in the industry, particularly when it came to hiring former athletes as broadcasters. He called it juicracy, a term he coined to describe what he saw as the growing trend of hiring former players without the necessary training for broadcasting. That opinion didn't win him many friends, but it got people thinking about what sports commentary should really be. But behind the scenes, away from the spotlight, Cosell was a very different man. He was a man who, despite his public bravado, relied deeply on his wife, Emmy. They were married for 46 years. He once said, "I wouldn't even cross the Triborough Bridge without Emmy." She was the calm to his storm, the balance to his chaos. At home, Howard was a quiet man. He didn't shout or argue. He loved poetry, reciting Keats and Shelley to his daughters, Jill and Hillary. He cherished simple pleasures, like playing card games with neighbors. Howard, the man behind the microphone, was different. He was thoughtful, humble, and deeply dependent on his family. Without Emmy, everything changed. His health deteriorated, and his spirit faded. The world had only seen a small piece of him, the brash, loud, confident public figure. The real Howard, the man who needed his wife to function, was a side most people never saw. But even with the love and support of his family, Cosell struggled. The pressures of fame and success, combined with the stress of Monday Night Football, led him down a darker path. Alcohol became a crutch. He drank before, during, and after his shows, and the results were sometimes disastrous. On November 23, 1970, after a few too many martinis, he made an embarrassing blunder on air. He slurred the word Philadelphia, calling it Philadelphia, and vomited on Don Meredith's cowboy boots. It was a shocking moment for viewers, but not an isolated one. Cosell's drinking became part of his legacy, something as synonymous with his name as his voice. Underneath the bravado, Cosell was insecure. He was constantly worried that people didn't like him, that he wasn't respected. His public outbursts, his bold opinions, were often shields protecting his fragile ego. He needed to be seen. He needed to prove he belonged. And when that respect wasn't given to him, it hurt deeply. Cosell once said that only Frank Sinatra received more negative press than he did. It wasn't just arrogance. It was fear. One of the most unforgettable moments of Cosell's career happened on December 8, 1980. As millions watched Monday Night Football, he received the devastating news that John Lennon had been shot. In a quiet, somber voice, he broke the news to the world. "This is just a football game. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News," he said. It was a moment of raw emotion, a reminder that even in the middle of a football game, life could come crashing in. But it was a comment made on September 5, 1983, that would forever alter the course of Howard Cosell's career. During a Monday Night Football game, Cosell referred to Washington wide receiver Alvin Garrett as that little monkey. In those 6 words, Howard Cosell sparked a national firestorm. The backlash was swift. People were stunned, and critics came out in full force. Reverend Joseph Lowery demanded a public apology, and suddenly, the man who had been a broadcasting giant was in the middle of one of the biggest controversies in television history. In those moments, Cosell's career and his legacy came crashing down. It was the kind of mistake that can never be taken back. And in the blink of an eye, the man who had shaped the world of sports broadcasting, the man who had stood for truth, respect, and courage, found himself at the center of a storm he could never have predicted. It wasn't just a catchphrase or a gaffe, it was a moment that defined the rest of his life. The scandal that took down Howard Cosell wasn't just a moment of poor judgment. It was a lightning rod for larger conversations that had been simmering beneath the surface of American sports for years. When Cosell made the infamous comment about Alvin Garrett, calling him that little monkey, the storm it ignited was more than just about a slip of the tongue. It became a racial flashpoint, highlighting the glaring disparity between the black athletes on the field and the lack of black voices in the broadcast booth. The pressure quickly mounted. Jesse Jackson, Muhammad Ali, and even Garrett himself came to his defense. But by then, it didn't matter. The media had framed the moment, and the narrative had already been written. Public opinion, quick to latch onto outrage, couldn't be swayed, no matter the context or Cosell's decades-long record of speaking out for civil rights. It didn't matter that he had defended Muhammad Ali when the world had turned its back on him. It didn't matter that he had fought for the voices of those who had been silenced. In the blink of an eye, that one comment erased decades of work. The tide of outrage grew so powerful, it turned a misstep into a scandal, and soon, Cosell's career was hanging by a thread. By the end of the 1983 season, after 13 years of helping reshape Monday Night Football, Cosell walked away. His departure wasn't just the result of the scandal, it was also a reflection of his disillusionment with how the game and the television industry had evolved. He had been the fearless voice, the one who wasn't afraid to challenge the system, to speak truth to power. Now, he was simply done. The same man who had once been so passionate about sports, about pushing boundaries, now found himself disconnected from the very medium that had once given him a platform. After stepping away from television, Cosell's personal life began to unravel. The loss of his beloved wife, Emmy, in 1990 was a blow from which he never fully recovered. She had been his anchor, the quiet presence behind his public persona. Without her, the bright lights of fame seemed dimmer. In 1991, at the age of 73, he was diagnosed with cancer. It marked the beginning of a slow decline, his health failing, his spirit withering, and his voice, once so bold, now barely audible. In 1992, Cosell retired for good. His physical battles, cancer, heart disease, Parkinson's, and strokes took their toll. Interviews from that time showed a man full of regret, grappling with the sense that he hadn't been allowed to complete the work he started. A voice that had once shaped American sports commentary was now silenced, the world barely noticing the quiet fade of a giant. When he passed away on April 23, 1995, at the age of 77, the reactions were mixed. Some remembered him as a legend, a man who made sports broadcasting smarter, bolder, and more dynamic. Others couldn't shake the controversies, the arrogance, and the scandal that had forever changed the course of his career. But despite the controversy, the accolades still came. 2 years before his death, TV Guide named him the all-time best sports broadcaster. He was inducted into the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame, the Television Hall of Fame, and later received a posthumous Sports Emmy for Lifetime Achievement. He was also honored with spots in the American Sportscasters Hall of Fame and the International Boxing Hall of Fame. These honors, awarded long after his fall from grace, were a final testament to the fact that Cosell had forever altered the landscape of sports broadcasting. His legacy, marked by his boldness, his courage to speak out, and yes, the controversy that brought him down, remains untouchable. Even in the face of his downfall, no one could ever deny that Howard Cosell had changed the game.